The sun was setting behind the red hills of Arizona, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. The air was calm, carrying the smell of dry earth and wildflowers. A cowboy named Eli Turner rode his horse slowly down the dusty path toward his small ranch. He had spent the whole day repairing fences and checking on cattle. His hat was tilted low, his face covered with dust, and his mind was lost in thoughts of another long evening alone. Eli lived a quiet life. He was a man of few words, kind-hearted but lonely. Years ago he had lost his family in an accident, and since then he had learned to live with silence as his only companion. His horse Dusty was the only friend he had left. Every night Eli would light his old lantern, sit on the porch and watch the stars appear one by one. But that evening fate had something very different waiting for him. As he reached a narrow turn near the riverbed, Dusty suddenly stopped. The horse's ears twitched and it let out a soft snort. Eli frowned and looked ahead. Something or someone was lying near the dry grass by the rocks. At first he thought it was just an animal or maybe an old blanket caught by the wind. But when he came closer, his heart skipped a beat. It was a little girl. She was sitting on the cold ground, hugging her knees tightly to her chest. Her head was completely bald, her tiny feet bare and covered with dust. Her small dress was torn and her skin looked pale under the fading sunlight. She wasn't crying, but her eyes, dark and full of fear, watched him carefully as if unsure whether to trust him or run away. Eli dismounted slowly, not wanting to frighten her. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "Are you hurt?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared, her lips trembling. He could see that she was shaking, not from fear alone, but from the cold evening air. Her hands were scratched and her face showed signs of exhaustion. Eli took off his long coat and gently laid it over her shoulders. "It's all right," he said in a calm tone. "You're safe now." Still, she didn't speak. She only looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He noticed something unusual. Her features were delicate, her eyes shaped differently, her skin tone lighter. It didn't take him long to realize she wasn't from around there. She looked like she might be Chinese. "Where are your parents?" Eli asked softly, but she only lowered her gaze, pressing her lips together as if she didn't want to remember. Eli sighed deeply. The girl was clearly lost, or worse, abandoned, and the thought of leaving her there, alone in the wild, tore at his heart. So he picked her up gently in his arms. She was light, fragile like a bird, and she didn't resist. He placed her carefully on Dusty's back and walked beside the horse all the way home, making sure she stayed balanced. The evening wind grew colder, and by the time they reached his ranch, the stars were already shining above. When they entered the small wooden cabin, Eli lit a fire in the fireplace. The soft crackling sound filled the silence. He found an old blanket and wrapped it around the girl. She sat near the fire, her small fingers stretched toward the warmth, still quiet and withdrawn. Eli made her some warm milk and a little bread. She looked at it, then at him, as if afraid to take it. "Go on," he said gently. "It's for you." She hesitated, then took the cup with both hands and sipped slowly. Her eyes softened a little, and for the first time he saw a hint of peace on her face. "What's your name?" Eli asked again, his voice low and kind. After a long silence, she finally whispered something. It was faint, almost like the sound of the wind. "Li Mei," she said. Her accent was soft, but her voice carried sadness deeper than her age. Eli nodded. "That's a pretty name, Li Mei." He wanted to ask more, but he could see she was too tired. Her eyes started to close as she leaned against the chair, the firelight reflecting on her pale skin. Eli lifted her gently and placed her on the small bed in the corner. He covered her with another blanket and watched for a moment as she fell asleep. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, listening to the wind. Who was she? Why was she alone? Where were her parents? He had no answers, only questions. But one thing was certain. He couldn't turn her away. The next morning, Li Mei woke up startled, as if unsure where she was. She looked around the small room, eyes wide. Eli smiled gently. "Morning, little one," he said. "You're safe here." She blinked and slowly relaxed. Eli made breakfast, eggs, bread, and milk, and watched her eat. Though she ate quietly, he noticed how hungry she was. After breakfast, he gave her a pair of old shoes that once belonged to his niece and found a small hat to cover her bald head. "You'll catch cold without it," he said, placing it gently on her head. Li Mei looked up at him and gave a faint smile, Just a small one, but enough to warm his heart. Days passed, and slowly the girl began to speak a little more. She told him in broken English that she came from a faraway camp where workers lived. Her family had come to America hoping for a better life, but something happened, something that separated her from them. She couldn't explain everything, but Eli could tell she had been through something painful. He didn't push her for details. Instead, he focused on helping her feel safe. He showed her how to feed the chickens, how to brush Dusty, and how to plant small seeds in the backyard. She followed him everywhere, her bare feet now replaced by small boots, her laughter sometimes echoing in the quiet ranch. But every night, Eli could still see that same sadness in her eyes before she went to sleep. She would sometimes whisper in her own language as if talking to someone far away. Eli wished he could understand her words. One afternoon, when Eli returned from the nearby town, he found Li Mei sitting on the porch steps, holding something in her hands. It was a small piece of paper, wrinkled and torn. On it was a faded photograph of a man and woman standing beside a little girl. "My mama and Baba," she said softly, showing it to him. Her voice trembled. Eli nodded slowly, his heart heavy. "We'll find them," he said quietly. "I promise you that." From that moment, Eli knew what he had to do. He would not let the little girl remain lost forever. He would search every nearby town, ask every traveler, and visit every camp if he had to. As the sun went down that evening, he stood outside, watching Li Mei chase a butterfly near the fence. The sight made him smile. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive again. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe it would be hard, maybe even impossible, but he had made up his mind. The cowboy who had once lived in silence now had a reason to ride again, and that reason was a small Chinese girl with no hair, no shoes, and the purest heart he had ever known. Days turned into weeks, and the small ranch began to feel different. Where there was once silence, now there was laughter. Where there was loneliness, now there was purpose. Eli Turner found himself waking up earlier and working harder than before. It wasn't for the ranch anymore, it was for the little girl who had brought light back into his life. Li Mei had changed too. Her cheeks looked healthier, her eyes brighter. She followed Eli everywhere, helping him with small chores. She loved feeding the chickens, brushing Dusty, and watching the sunset from the porch steps. Sometimes she hummed small tunes from her homeland, soft, beautiful melodies that made Eli's heart ache with both joy and sadness. But behind that gentle smile, Eli could still see something hidden, an emptiness that no amount of care could completely fill. Every night, Li Mei would hold the small torn photograph of her parents and whisper in her language before falling asleep. Eli didn't understand the words, but he knew what they meant. She was praying for them. One chilly morning, Eli decided it was time to start searching. He saddled Dusty and packed a small bag. "We're going to find your family," he said gently. Li Mei looked up at him, surprised and uncertain. "Really?" she asked softly. Eli smiled. "I promised you, didn't I? A cowboy keeps his word." They started their journey the next day. Eli placed Li Mei in front of him on the horse, wrapping his coat around her to keep her warm. The path was long, dusty, and sometimes lonely, but Eli's heart was determined. He stopped in every small town and camp they passed, showing Li Mei's photo to anyone who would look. "Have you seen these people?" he would ask. Some shook their heads politely. Others said they had never seen any Chinese family nearby. Still, Eli didn't give up. After several days, they reached a mining camp far from the main road. The camp was filled with workers, many of them immigrants. The sound of hammers, shovels, and carts echoed in the dry air. Li Mei held Eli's hand tightly, a mix of hope and fear in her eyes. An old man sitting by the fire noticed them and stood up slowly. "You looking for someone, stranger?" he asked. Eli nodded and showed him the photograph. "This little girl's family. Have you seen them?" The man took the photo, squinted at it, then sighed. "Ain't sure, but there was a Chinese family working here a few months back. Hard times hit 'em bad. The mother got real sick and the father left to find medicine but never came back. Folks said they moved east when the camp closed." Li Mei's eyes filled with tears. She clutched the photograph tightly, whispering, "Mama, Baba." Eli's heart broke seeing her like that, but he placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll keep looking, little one. Don't lose hope." They traveled east through towns and valleys, sleeping under stars when they couldn't find shelter. Along the way, Eli taught Li Mei how to ride on her own, how to start a small campfire, and how to listen to the sounds of nature. One evening, while they sat near a quiet river, Li Mei looked up at the stars and said softly, "Do you think my parents miss me?" Eli looked at her with kind eyes. They surely do. Any parent would give anything to see their child safe and smiling. She nodded slowly, then whispered, "You're like my papa too." Eli's throat tightened. He looked away, pretending to check the firewood, but her words hit deep inside. For the first time in years, someone had called him something close to family. Their journey continued for weeks. Eli's clothes grew dusty, and Li Mei's shoes started to wear out, but their spirit stayed strong. Everywhere they went, people were kind to them. Some gave them food. Others shared what little they knew. Finally, one afternoon, they reached a small town near the railway line. It was quiet, with a few shops, a church, and a group of workers unloading supplies. Among them were a few Chinese men speaking in their native tongue. Eli's heart started to beat faster. He approached one of them and asked, "Do you know a family named Chen? They have a little girl named Li Mei." The man frowned, thinking for a moment. Then his eyes widened. "Li Mei, small girl, no hair?" "Yes, I think I know. Her father was here 2 weeks ago. He's been searching for her." Li Mei gasped. "My papa?" The man nodded quickly. "Yes. He works by the rail camp just a few miles north." Eli didn't waste a second. He lifted Li Mei onto Dusty and galloped north, the wind brushing past them. Li Mei's small hands held tightly around his waist, her heart beating fast with hope. When they reached the camp, workers turned their heads as the cowboy and the little girl arrived. A thin man wearing a torn shirt and tired eyes stood by a wagon. He looked older than his years, but when his eyes met Li Mei's, he froze. "Li Mei," he shouted, his voice breaking. Li Mei jumped off the horse and ran to him. "Baba!" she cried, throwing her arms around him. The man fell to his knees, holding her tightly, tears streaming down his face. Eli stood back, watching the reunion in silence. The father held his daughter like he would never let her go again. The camp workers stopped their work, smiling softly at the touching sight. After a few moments, the father approached Eli. His English was broken, but his gratitude was clear. You bring her back to me." "Thank you. Thank you, sir." He bowed slightly, his eyes filled with emotion. Eli shook his head gently. "You don't have to thank me. She's a brave little girl. She kept me company when I needed it most." The man smiled through his tears. "She is strong, like her mother." Eli noticed the sadness in his eyes and asked softly, "Your wife?" The man lowered his head. She gone. Long time ago." Eli placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She'd be proud of you both." That night, the workers invited Eli to stay for supper. They shared rice, soup, and stories under the soft glow of lanterns. Li Mei sat beside her father, her hand never leaving his. Eli listened quietly, feeling peace settle over him. When it was time to leave the next morning, Li Mei ran to Eli and hugged him tightly. "You saved me," she said, her small voice full of warmth. "I'll never forget you." Eli smiled, tipping his hat. "And I'll never forget you, little one. You be strong, all right?" She nodded, her eyes shimmering with tears. "I will." Eli mounted Dusty, and as he rode away, he turned back one last time. Li Mei and her father stood together, waving. The morning sun shone on them, making everything look golden. For a long time, Eli kept that image in his heart. The girl he had found lost and afraid, now safe and smiling again. When he finally returned to his ranch, the silence felt different. It was no longer lonely, it was peaceful. Sometimes he would find a small drawing on his table sent from the camp, with a few words written in careful English. "Thank you, Cowboy Eli." He would smile every time he read it. The days went on. The ranch returned to its calm rhythm, but Eli's heart was not the same. He had learned that sometimes, kindness to a stranger could heal not just one life, but two. And though he never saw Li Mei again in person, every evening when the sun set, he would look toward the horizon and whisper, "Be happy, little one," because deep down, he knew that somewhere out there under the same sky, a little girl was smiling, and that was enough for him.